All right, we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. At this time, we're going to be hearing a presentation of our tax rate. I would like to hear an adoption of the agenda.
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
And for the public, we also have Board Member Miller that is watching, and she's on with us virtually. Let's go ahead and move to the presentation of 1.03. Dr. Buck, I'll allow you to introduce.
So I'd like to bring up Mr. Holder, our CFO, Assistant Superintendent, and he's going to go through about a 10-minute or less presentation. We had a longer work session earlier tonight, about 30 minutes, that probably went into more detail, but he's going to share the tax rate recommendation for you to approve later tonight in regular board meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Buck. I will do my best. I will try to go through this very quickly, but also give it the attention that it deserves and try to give everybody a picture of where we're at and the tax rate that is being presented tonight. What you have in front of you on your screen is our 2023 assessed value by type. Valuations are typically broken down between real estate as well as personal property. And within real estate, you have residential, ag, horticulture, utility and industrial, which is commonly referred to as commercial, and then personal property, which are vehicles, boats, things of that nature that you own. This year was a reassessment year in Jackson County. We know that with the reassessments, it was an abnormally high reassessment year. You see the residential increases there with the real estate being almost 33% as compared to last year. Ag was actually almost a 50% increase as compared to last year. Commercial was about 26%, and then personal property was actually down 7.3% as compared to the previous year. You put those together, the aggregate increase was 24.9%, looking at the 2022 total assessed value as compared to the 2023. And just a reminder, the large majority of our assessment is in Jackson County, but we do have a small piece of Cass County as well in the very southern part of our district. Assessed value by type within this district, we are a district that is heavily residential when it comes to our assessed valuation. Many districts in the state of Missouri, you would more commonly see residential in the 60 percentile. Very rural parts might even have a much heavier ag part of their assessed valuation. But breaking it down, again, you see the increase there that was reflected on the last slide of $676 million. Of that $676 million, $40.2 million of that was new construction, and that is related to essentially residential or commercial properties. Could be an ag structure, but that is limited to real estate. As I mentioned earlier, personal property valuations actually decreased 7.3%. And so within that, all of that $40.2 million is going to be due to new construction of residential, commercial, or ag properties. So looking at market value to assessed value, assessors in the state of Missouri are by statute supposed to assess property at 90% of market value, at least 90% of market value, whether that be residential, commercial, ag, or personal property. Residential is 19%, so whatever the market value of the home, you would take 19% of that for your assessed value. And then you can see the percentages there, whether it applies to commercial, ag, and personal property being the highest at 33.33%. So the tax rate that we're proposing is based on our current ceiling, 4.5962. That's in operating and or the general fund. Just keep in mind, Special revenue, which is commonly also referred to as the Teachers Fund or Fund 2. Most districts in the state of Missouri, including us, do not levy funds in there. Money comes in through the state formula and/or a transfer each month to fund the expenditures from the Special Revenue Fund. The General Fund and the Capital Projects Fund. So those three funds are all considered operating when it comes to your levy at the state level. The way they look at it is it's operating. You can split those amounts. So the $459.62, you can see that we put almost all of that in our general operating fund, and then we put 5 cents in our capital projects fund. But that amount can vary. You could put amounts in all three funds, and it's all still considered part of your operating levy, all right? And then debt service, which is separate, is reflected below. So what you see represented there is our our operating rate ceiling of 4.5962. This year we are taking a voluntary rollback. We are applying the Hancock Amendment to what our operating rate ceiling is. And so we are taking a voluntary rollback of just over 65 cents, 0.6524. The other rollback that you see there is our Proposition C rollback. We are one of probably about 10%, 15% of the districts in the state of Missouri that do not have a full Prop C waiver. And so there is a calculation that is done. The state gives us the information, and that we actually use that information. We don't have the rollback on that or any of the levers that you would pull. That's a statewide calculation for your Prop C. And so that changes from year to year. And so last year, for instance, our Prop C rollback was 0.1573, so almost 16 cents. This year, that calculation was just over 10 cents. So the 0.1026 is reflected there. So going down to about 2/3 of the way down, the total there after the rollback in the operating is 3.8412 in our operating. That's combining the general with the capital projects. The debt service there that you see reflected, our ceiling is $1.07, just over that. When we were at the ballot in April, this past April, we said that if our operating ceiling went up, which it did, it went from 4.3962 to 4.5962, we would roll back our debt service, the corresponding 20 cents. And so you see that reflected. The rollback is actually 0.2010, so just over 20 cents. But that's because we are getting back to what we said we would do, which is roll back from $1.07, which had historically been our debt service levy, to 87 cents. The total tax rate then that is proposed is 4.7112. And this aligns from an operating standpoint as well as a debt service standpoint with the budget that was presented in June of 2023. So the calculation, what does the 4.7112 mean? And that's what the next few slides will cover. This just shows how market value is multiplied by the classification percentage. That gives you the assessed value, and then it's times the levy, which is per $100 of assessed value, and that equals the tax bill. So if if $300,000 home, the same value, $300,000, $300,000, you can see what the tax rate would have done. Most commonly, take market value times 19%, that's $57,000. I typically, you can divide that by 100, then take it by the tax rate. So last year, that was 5.3089. This year, 4.7112. The next slide represents, if you look at the average real estate increase, all right, that was 32.9% just on real estate, not commercial and not ag. That goes up from, again, the rate's the same, 5.3089 to 4.7112. And so the increase, the market value went up almost 33%, 32.9%. But then with the rollback in the tax rate, the increase in taxes would be 17.9%. Obviously, that's based on the average. If your market value was lower, then the increase in taxes is going to be reduced. If the market value is higher, and we've all heard about situations that it has been higher, then obviously that increase is going to be higher. Now, that depends on the value of the home. This is an example of a $300,000 market value. Last year, the average was $255,000 in the city of Lee Summit, but for the purposes of this calculation, $300,000 is what I used. Very quickly, the break-even calculation. All right, if market value went up 13%, then essentially the real estate tax portion for the Lee Summit R7 school district, right, just the school district portion, basically is a net break-even. Just historically, to look at the tax rates, this is a look back 10 years. In FY15, the amount was, total tax rate was $6 and almost 12 cents. Moving forward, you can see the decrease down to $4.71. Last slide, just a district tax rate comparison. We compare ourselves to we call it the Big Six, the 5 districts that are closest in size in Missouri to us in the Kansas City metro area. You can see total tax rate there. I'll tell you by operating tax rate, we're also the lowest, but this is total tax rate reflected there. You see LSR7 at 4.7112. Our nearest district is Blue Springs, which is just over 35 cents higher, and then going all the way up to Liberty, which is about $1.21 higher. These are current, and they reflect the most recent tax rate hearings that were held in these jurisdictions. Went through that very quickly. Is that?
Okay, at this time, is there any questions for Mr. Holder? Okay, thank you, Mr. Holder. Seeing none at this time, I would like to open up and declare the annual tax rate hearing opened. And so if there's anyone that would like to speak, if you would, please just come to the podium. And if anyone else would like to speak, if you'll just sit in the front row and wait till it is your turn. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Reuben Mitchell. I just had to say 2 things I'd ask for the board is that, yes, you approve this. And then the second thing is to use your influence and your prestige in the community to apply pressure to the assessment process, because this is the second time in a row this has happened. And I imagine this is going to happen next time, too. That we need to get some reform going on here. This is exceptionally egregious and unfair between neighbors. I'm not really sure. I understand that you get the district does not have direct control over that. That's I understand that, but we do have influence. We can go and talk to the legislators. We can maybe loan out some of the accountants because they're really good at this. Anyway, so that would be my second thing is perhaps talk for the people. This has got to stop.
Good evening. My name is Bob Glaus. Just a quick point. Nice presentation. The notice of this meeting had a really nice summary of the figures that you presented. It also included a little table showing total new revenue, excluding debt service levy, and very clearly and accurately shows new revenue from the reassessment of 11.9%. My understanding of the Hancock Amendment and the details of the Missouri law that accompany that the school district, except for the debt service, is also bound by the limits in the law, being the lesser of consumer price index, which I think is 6.5%, or a maximum of 5%. So if nothing else, that 11.9% well exceeds the 5% That is my understanding of the state law. If for some reason the district is exempt from that, I'm not aware of that, and I'd like to get an explanation. So that's the only point I needed to make.
Good evening. Yes, I understand that rolling back the rate is a nod to the spirit of Hancock. From my understanding from the press release or email that came out from the district, that R7 is not legally required to roll back their rate this year because of the levy transfer election. However, the district plans to roll back the rate to meet the integrity of the ballot question. It was never the intention of the district to experience a windfall from this ballot issue because of large increases in assessed valuation. Well, let's talk about how you define a windfall. Budget numbers, budget presentations typically cover about a 3-year time span, which is really not a trend if you're looking at a financial analysis or where the big trend lines are. You really want a longer time period than just 3 years. So I spent an inordinate amount of time on Board Docs, which is not the most user-friendly platform, but I did go back and look at 10 years of preliminary budgets from each June budget hearing or work session from the Junes of the last 10 years. I also understand that 2013 was the year that my son graduated from Lee Summit North. And at the time, there were about 17,500 students in the district. The 2013-14 numbers showed that, for instance, state funding was total of about $62.8 million. David Buck's been quoted numerous times. In the Independent, he said that the state funding has dipped from 34% of the revenue to 26% in that time period, and that's a frequent refrain that I'm hearing from the district. But percentages do not tell the whole story. Let's talk about the whole raw numbers. So the state funding in 2013 with, again, 17,500 students was $62 million. This document from the 2013 work session says that it was 29% of the overall budget was state funding. Fast forward to the 23-24, 10 years later, budgeted $82 million in state funding. So by my math, that's about $20 million increase for the same number of students. So then the argument then comes back to, of course, inflation. Well, if you look at the change in the consumer price index that I pulled from the Federal Reserve, and granted, CPI is probably not the best measure of inflation if you've tried to buy gas or groceries or any of that, but if you look at the change in CPI over that 10 years, it's been 21%, and most of that increase has been in 21 and 22. Most years, the total inflation number was well under 2%. So if we're talking about keeping up with inflation, well, the overall operating budget, when I look at expenditures of the district, and I call, granted, school funding is very complicated, but I just looked at salaries and benefits, contracted services, and supplies, which would be the day-to-day running of the district. In 2013, that total was $182 million. Budgeted for 23-24 is $267 million, which is an increase of $84.8 million, or a 46% increase in the last 10 years. So obviously, the spending is increased faster than the number of students. So, my take on this whole thing is, okay, the levy drop for my portion of the tax bill went from a $1,000 increase to a $700 increase. So I've saved $300 by this levy drop. And, again, it's inflation. It went from a 60% increase to a 44% increase of just my R7 tax bill. Typically, when I'm faced with a increase in expenses, then, it's time to make some hard choices. You spend less, you cut back on some things. And frankly, I just don't hear a lot of discussion on what we can do to be smarter users of taxpayers' dollars, what we can do to spend less, what we can do to be more efficient. There's lots of committees and task force and so on in the district, and I just don't see a lot of let's get together and see how we can be more efficient. And I'm old enough to remember the Judge Clark decision of the mid-'80s where they said, well, Kansas City school districts are failing, they don't have enough money. And so he ordered $2 billion worth of expenditures, which was a huge amount in the mid-1980s. And the district continued to fail. They went from 35,000 students to less than half that today. So to say that money is the answer to all the problems falls a little flat with me. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Okay. Mr. Holder, is there any response that you would like to give to any of the information that was shared regarding our legal Hancock rights as a district, and then also what would possibly been the impact on the district if we chose not to do a rollback?
To the latter question, if we had not rolled back, it would have been $22 million. So by rolling back, it is $22 million of revenue that we will not recognize. To Mr. Plass's question, and I totally understand the question. And the reason for that is because with the operating levy transfer, 20 cents went into operating. And what you see at the bottom there is a reflection only of operating, which I think you accurately pointed out. So if you look at a tax rate hearing, notice if we had not been at the ballot, and I have one here that I'd be happy to share with you, it shows that the revenue from reassessment would have been 6.0745%, which is the 5% that we're allowed plus new construction and improvements, because that always goes on top. We're actually limited to 5%, even if CPI is 6.5, or last year it was 7. The Hancock Amendment always limits that at 5%. So that's the reason why, because you're seeing the debt service move into operating, which we did plan to do in order to give the salaries and benefit raises to our staff.
Thank you, Mr. Holder. At this time, I declare the closing of our tax rate hearing, and this meeting is now